in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea, which we call today the Dead Sea. So we learn from this passage that the location of the cities of the plain is somewhere in the valley near the Dead Sea. Now, by 1924, most of the cities in the Bible had already been identified. Many of them had been excavated, and yet none of the cities of the plain had been found. And this really bothered the renowned biblical archaeologist William Foxwell Albright. And so he organized an expedition to go looking for the cities of the plain. Now, the western shore of the Dead Sea was very well explored and surveyed. It was very accessible. There were roads down to it. And yet no archaeological sites for the cities of the plain had been found there. In contrast, across the Dead Sea, the eastern shoreline of the Dead Sea was an extremely remote area with no roads going into it. Albright wrote, "Eastern Palestine still contains districts which are an archaeological blank. One of these districts has been the southern and southeastern shores of the Dead Sea." And so Albright organized an expedition to go and explore this remote region archaeologically. On February 15th, 1924, the expedition left Jerusalem in 4 vehicles that were loaded down with supplies and equipment, and they drove down from Jerusalem into the Jordan Valley north of the Dead Sea, and they cut right across this, despite the fact that there are many magnificent ancient mounds here called tells, and there was a small group of scholars, a minority view, that believed that the cities of the plain were north of the Dead Sea. However, the majority of scholars, including Albright and his team members, rejected this idea based on what the Bible says. In Ezekiel 16:46, Ezekiel is rebuking Jerusalem when he says, "Your older sister Samaria, who lived to the north of you with her daughters, and your younger sister, who lived to the south of you with her daughters, was Sodom." So the north side of the Dead Sea is basically in line with Jerusalem. So anything that is north of the Dead Sea is also north of Jerusalem. And so Ezekiel 16:46 alone disqualifies the plain on the north side of the Dead Sea for being the location of the cities of the plain.
So Albright and his expedition team drove across the northern plain, and as they made their ascent up to Ammon, Mount Nebo was just off to their right.
And there is an event that happens on Mount Nebo in the Bible that gives additional information that shows a southern location for the cities of the plain. From Nebo, the Lord showed Moses all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb, and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. This aerial panoramic can help us understand what Moses saw from Mount Nebo, where the Lord showed Moses all the land, from Gilead, as far north as Dan, and then moving south, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim, Jericho, all the land of Judah, the Negeb, and as far south as Zoar. I'm standing up on Mount Nebo, and when Moses was here, the Lord gave him a panoramic view of the Promised Land, which started in the far north at Gilead and Dan, and then swept to the south as far as Zoar. This establishes that Zoar is south of Mount Nebo. From Mount Nebo, I traveled east a short distance to the town called Medeba in the Bible, today called Madaba. This picture, taken in the early 1900s, shows Madaba, and on the outskirts of the town, the Church of St. George. Behind me here is a modern church. Below me here, called Wadi Karak, was very, very remote. The expedition drove along the plateau till they got to the town of Karak, and then they unloaded their cars onto 9 horses and 12 pack mules, started down this ridge above the Karak Canyon. This was a very remote area. This is why Albright was the first archaeologist to go down into this region. This was a 4,000-foot drop from Karak all the way to the shores of the Dead Sea. Albright wrote, "Hardly had we started downward when one mule fell over the precipice and was dashed to pieces several hundred feet below. And by the time they got down this trail, they had lost 3 of their mules,
over the edge of this ridge that fell to their deaths down into the canyon.
On February 22nd, they arrived at the village of Isophian. This was on the southern side of Wadi Hassa, which in the Bible is the Zered River. So they set up their camp on the outskirts of the village and began their exploration. And they had no doubt, according to the biblical information, that they were in the heart of the cities of the plain. Genesis 10:19 says, "And the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar, as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, as far as Lasha." This verse says that the western border of Canaan is the Mediterranean coast, from Sidon in the north to Gaza in the south. What establishes Canaan's southern border is turning inland at Gaza, which is east, and the direction of the cities of the plain. This verse shows clearly that the cities of the plain are located east of Gaza. Albright wrote, "The primary purpose of the joint expedition was to secure evidence, throwing light on the obscure but fascinating problem of the cities of the plain, especially Sodom, Gomorrah, and Zoar, which persistent biblical and post-biblical tradition locates at the southern end of the Dead Sea." So Albright had his team camped right where they needed to be. They were in line with the biblical scriptures. They were near the shore of the Dead Sea, according to Genesis 14. They were east of Gaza, Genesis 10:19. They were south of Jerusalem, Ezekiel 16:46, and south of Mount Nebo, Deuteronomy 34:3. And they were at the place that was marked as Zorah, one of the cities of the plain, on the Madaba map. So despite all this, they searched the area and they could not find what they were looking for. And what they were looking for was pottery from the early Bronze period, because this was the period of Abraham and Lot and the events in the Bible of the cities of the plain. And so they searched and searched. They found later pottery from the Islamic period, from the early Christian period, but they couldn't find these earlier forms of pottery from the Old Testament period. And so they were very discouraged. They eventually gave up, and they were actually on their way back to Kerak, coming up from the shores of the Dead Sea, when one of the members of the party looked over and noticed where some of the locals had been digging, and he walked over there and found what they had been looking for all along. The ground was literally covered with this early bronze pottery. The rest of the team came over, they collected pottery, they found that the Acropolis of the site had been walled, and Albright and others at the time dated that pottery to around 2000 BC, the time of Abraham and Lot, the time of the events in the Bible that affect the cities of the plain.
So on the southeast side of the Dead Sea, this was the first early bronze city that was discovered in 1924, known as Babadra.
After the discovery of Babadra, it wasn't for another 41 years, in 1965, that one of the students, former students of Albright, named Paul Lapp, finally excavated Babadra. Lapp wrote, "The northeast gate of the city was destroyed, as evidenced by charcoal, fallen bricks, and areas of ash, and the mud brick superstructure of the sanctuary collapsed. Seemingly after being burned, the entire city was affected."
This city was destroyed by fire in the end of the early Bronze period, and it never was rebuilt again.
If this is one of the cities of the plain, then this burn destruction would be expected, since Genesis 19 says, "Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens." Now, unfortunately, the story takes a tragic turn. On April 26, 1970, Paul Lapp was in Cyprus, and he was taking a swim off the coast when an undertow took him out to sea, and he drowned. The archaeological community was shocked by this. The director of the dig at Babadra was dead at the age of 39. Two of Lapp's students, Thomas Schaub and Walter Rast, became the new directors of the Babadra excavation. and in 1973 they led a survey of the surrounding area. 6 miles south of Babadra, they discovered and excavated another early bronze site called Numera. The Numera excavation report reads, "Obviously, the town suffered a severe fire, and it was forever abandoned."
So we are here at the city of Numera. This is the second early bronze city that was discovered just southeast of the Dead Sea. The excavations that took place here also discovered a burn destruction layer across the site that you can see all the ash that's left over in this burn destruction that runs along here. And so just like Babadra, this city was destroyed, literally burned to ashes, and never, ever, ever lived in again.
This also matches the description in the Bible. As Sodom and Gomorrah were overthrown along with their neighboring towns, says the Lord, so no one will live there, no people will dwell in it. The evidence was so strong that the excavator Walter Rask concluded, in the author's opinion, these two early Bronze III cities of Babadra and Numera may well be reflected in the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible. Now these two sites became associated with Sodom and Gomorrah. Babadra with Sodom because of its large size, and Numera with Gomorrah because a lot of linguists saw a connection between the Arabic name Numera and the biblical name Gomorrah. In the 1973 survey, south of Numera and Safi, another early bronze site called Fifa was discovered.
We are here at the archaeological site of Fifa. You can see the agricultural plain behind me, and this is the third early bronze site that has been found on the southern end of the Dead Sea. And like the others, it was destroyed by fire. The evidence of that can be seen right here in this fiery destruction layer. All this charcoal and ash. Literally, this city also was burned to ashes and never rebuilt or lived in again.
South of Fifa, a fourth early bronze site called Khanazir was found.
So we were up at Khanazir, the fourth city of the plains that we've been looking at. Khanazir is like these other sites that we've been looking at. It also has a burn destruction across it. I'll show it to you. In fact, I'll get down there and show it to you right now. You can see the black ash. This has never been excavated, but it's right here at the surface, the destruction. Sometimes it's hard to see in the other sites because they have been excavated, and so they've excavated through these burn layers. But this is a perfect example of what we see in these other sites. Khanazir was destroyed by fire, literally burned to ash, and never ever rebuilt or lived in again. With all these burned cities, you have to ask, what burned all these cities? They came to the conclusion in the excavations of Babadra and Numera that this was a natural disaster that burned these cities because they didn't find weapons of war in the destruction layer. And so what caused this burning? And we have these sulfur balls all through this area of the Dead Sea. You can see, I've collected some here, but you can see where some of them are in the ground here that you can pull out. They're all over the place here, literally millions of them. And so this is what was deemed the culprit. These are what are on display in the Archaeology Museum in connection to the destruction by fire of these cities.
The sulfur balls, which you see here, it's yellow, it's pure sulfur. We find these in the shores of the Dead Sea, and it could be something which could be interpreted as something which could have destroyed a city or some people because it's a ball of fire, like a brimstone, like you have in the Old Testament stories.
Look at these massive deposits of sulfur. I mean, it's amazing how much sulfur is down here on the southern side of the Dead Sea. Where do these sulfur balls that we see here come from, and how did they burn these cities? Well, the geologists that worked at Babadra and Numera in the excavations, named Clapp and Donahue, their conclusion was that there was an earthquake that then brought and ignited and brought up the sulfur, kind of like popcorn, and caught it on fire, and that it came raining down. Also, the petroleum and bitumen that was also up in the ground came up. That was their explanation for how these cities got burned through a natural disaster.
Yeah, the Bible is describing sulfur, and we have these bowls of sulfur here in Baba Dra and the shore of the Dead Sea. So you could light these. These could be fire balls, they could be brimstones. So you have the archaeological destruction of a city like Baba Dra, and the episodes in Genesis of Sodom and Gomorrah, and you've got these balls here of fire.
This is what happens when you... I've already started on fire. I haven't even dropped it yet. I literally started the thing on fire, just dripping on it. Anyways, this is what happens when sulfur ball hits brush. This is why they're not preserved, is because they are burned up. So I have never dropped a burning sulfur ball into the Dead Sea until now. Wow, it floats. Well, that might be why they're all bunched up. Maybe they floated on the surface and then the wind drove them. See, you don't know what's going to happen unless you actually take a sulfur ball and burn it and throw it into the Dead Sea. But this is the result. This is why the sulfur balls are preserved when they hit the Dead Sea, because they were extinguished, and that's why we find them around the shores of the Dead Sea.
In the plain southeast and south of the Dead Sea, the early bronze sites of Baba Dra, Numera, Fifa, and Khanazir had all been burned and abandoned, but in the middle of them is the unique site of Safi. This is Safi today, the agricultural plain. To the north, the Dead Sea. To the east are high mountains and a massive ancient cemetery, where countless pits have been dug by locals digging into the graves in search of antiquities. Just to the west, and between the cemetery and the Zered River, is the archaeological site of Khirbet Ashek Isa, where the Greek archaeologist Konstantinos Politis began excavations in 1999.
Here in Zoara, it was known but not excavated as substantially as we have. We have very clear evidence here from the mosaic floors, a church, various objects which date to the 6th century AD, just like the Madaba map where it shows Zoara. So it's quite certain, really, that this is the site of Zoara located on the Madaba map. The name Zoar, which is mentioned as Zoara, is very close phonetically to the Old Testament Zoar or Tzoar. It's also in the medieval period called Segur and Zughar. So the name is preserved for thousands of years, and it seems almost certain that this site here I'm standing on is biblical ancient Zoara.
In his excavations, Dr. Politis also found early bronze pottery, the same type of pottery that Albright's expedition team was specifically looking for but could not find when they explored this area in 1924.
This is biblical Zoar. This city is very unique from the others because this is the city the Bible says was not burned.
In Genesis 19, Lot is living with his family in Sodom, when the angels inform them of the coming destruction and tell them, "Flee for your lives." In response, Lot says, "Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Then my life will be spared." He said to him, "I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoar. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities. But he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. After this destruction, the only city left was Zoar. So what is the evidence that Zoar continues, as the Bible says? Well, we have historical sources and we have archaeology. So let's go through them real quickly. We have a later source in the Bible, Isaiah 15:5, that says that the fugitives from Moab flee as far as Zoar. Now, you don't flee to a destroy, burned city. You flee to an inhabited city. So we have a reference to Zoar as a city in the 8th century BC. Then we have a reference by Josephus, the 1st century AD historian, who talks about the Dead Sea extending as far as Zoar. So we have a city of Zoar existing at this time. Eusebius calls the city by the name Zorah and says that it's the only one of the cities of the Sodomites to be saved. Well, that connects the city named Zorah to the Old Testament city Zoar. He also says that even up till now, meaning his day, which is roughly AD 324, the city is inhabited and lies next to the Dead Sea. Then we also have Islamic sources. The Bible says that that the cities in this plain were destroyed, except for one, and that was Zoar. So isn't it interesting that Zoar is the one that makes it onto the map because it continued to exist?
Yeah, Zoar had a continual occupation, certainly up to through the Roman and Christian period, which is why it's located on the Madaba map.
Now, it is the goal of archaeology to then connect these archaeological layers of these cities that are stacked on top of each other to the historical sources that are referring to them. And so with Politis, he has excavated the Islamic layers, which connect, of course, to the Islamic period mentions in the historical sources there. Then he's also excavated these early Christian, Byzantine sources. This is the city that is on the Madaba map. This is the city that Eusebius is talking to. And then he's gotten down, he hasn't dug it, but he's gotten down to the top of the early Roman period, which is connecting to, it's the city that Josephus is referring to. Now, he has not dug these earlier layers, but he has pottery from them in these upper layers. This is called residual pottery. What residual pottery is some of the pottery from these older, deeper layers make their way up into these later, younger layers. There's many reasons for this. When the people lived in these later periods, they dug down into these earlier levels to lay the foundations of their house or to plant a tree. And so it's a common thing to get a mixed material in your layers. And so Politis found Iron Age pottery in those upper layers, which indicates that that city that connects to Isaiah 15:5 is down there. The remains, that archaeological layer is down there. Now see, that looks like Iron Age pottery to me.
Exactly. You're right. This could very well be Iron Age.
He also found Middle Bronze pottery, which is very significant because that's in this whole archaeological plain where it was destroyed by fire, where you have Middle Bronze pottery found is in this excavation because this is the city that continued into the Middle Bronze period. And then, of course, he also has Early Bronze pottery, which is from the city whose ruins lay underneath these other layers, which is the city that the Bible is talking about, that Lot ran to and that was saved from the catastrophe.
Considering that there are some residual Bronze Age and Iron Age finds here, it's highly likely that below, in the greater depths, below the Byzantine levels, is an occupation from these other periods, Bronze and Iron Age.
So what we are going to be doing, when I say we, I am a research professor at Shepherd's Theological Seminary in Cary, North Carolina. We have an archaeology program, and we're going to be joining Dr. Politis as the director, and we're going to be continuing this dig. And the goal of the dig is to be exploring and exposing these earlier layers and connecting them to these historical sources. Starting next winter, we'll be here with Politis
digging down and exploring the layers that are underneath the Byzantine layers.
If you're interested in studying archaeology, then I highly recommend that you go. I'll leave a link in the description where you can go and look at the program that Shepherd's Theological Seminary offers.
But, if you go back to the Old Testament, the reason, Lot and his family, his daughters, they didn't stay here. They said because it was a small place. And Zoar means the small place.
Yeah.
So for some reason, they didn't like it. They didn't stay here. They went and lived in a cave above this area.
Genesis 19:30 says, Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. On the Madaba map above the city called Zorah is depicted a church, labeled in Greek, the Sanctuary of Lot. East of Zoar, on the slope of a mountain, in 1991, Dr. Politis discovered and excavated another site.
We were walking along this area south of the Dead Sea, looking for archaeological and biblical sites, and we came across this land which was completely covered and had little pieces of broken pottery and glass, so we suspected something would be here. And then we began to excavate and found structures and this church.
When during your excavations did you come to realize that this was the church on the Manaba map?
As we were excavating this church, we came across the top of the cave. And as we descended, as we went down, we saw it was indeed a cave. And then we found an inscription which mentioned Lot. So we went to the Madaba map, the famous mosaic map in Madaba in Jordan, and we located a site which was labeled Lot's Sanctuary. So geographically, what we have on the site, the cave and the writing, the ancient writing, and the Madaba map all helped us to prove that this is Lot's cave.
So this is the church that you found when you excavated down, and then you found this cave that we see going off into here. This is the cave that the church itself commemorates.
Yep, that's why they built this church up in this mountain in a difficult place, but this was the holy cave that they wanted to build a church around. So this church was commemorating the cave where Lot and his daughters lived after the destruction of their hometown Sodom. We excavated down below where I'm standing, and we found a layer that belonged to the New Testament, the time of Jesus Christ. So people were also coming here. But even deeper, we found pottery belonging to what's called the Bronze Age, and this is more or less the time of Genesis of the Old Testament. So Lot's daughters and him could have been staying here.
Just to make sure that I got it straight, when you excavated the cave, you came down and you found material from the Bronze Age period with the material you pulled out to show that this was occupied at the time of Genesis.
Exactly.
And so you have one thing on top of another, these layers, archaeological layers, that go all the way from the early Christian period all the way back to the time of Jesus, and then all the way back to the time of Lot.
Yep. 5,000 years of occupation, people believing this was Lot's cave.
Probably the site that we're going to be digging down at Sheikh Isa, we're going to continue that dig, is so important, but really this site here is the one that absolutely nails that this is the area of the cities of the plain, because this is biblical Zoar.
There you have a flat area here, which is a plain area. We just mentioned here, we have Bronze Age pots 5,000 years ago. We also have 5 cities here that have Bronze Age settlements and pottery. That's the 5 cities of the plain. Zoara is one of them, where we're going to be working.
What's a bummer to me is that outside of biblical archaeology, many people have been taught these wrong theories. There's really 2 theories. One is that the cities of the plain are west of the Dead Sea, and the other is that they are north of the Dead Sea.
So despite all of this evidence, many Christians have been taught that the cities of the plain are located on the western shore of the Dead Sea. And they're shown these geological formations, and they're told that these are man-made, that they're archaeological, and that these layers that you see here are white ash from the burn destruction of these cities. This is a sensationalistic claim, meaning it's a false claim. This has nothing to do with archaeology. This is geology, and this is not white ash. This is a sedimentary rock called Lisan Marl, which is found in formations all around the Dead Sea and all the way up north along the Jordan River.
The difference can be seen at Baba Dra. This is a geological formation formed by layers of sedimentary rock and erosion. On top of the geological formation are archaeological structures of stone walls and houses, making Baba Dra an archaeological site. On the western shores of the Dead Sea, there are plenty of Lisan Marl formations, but no archaeological sites. No archaeologists believe that the cities of the plain are west of the Dead Sea because no archaeological sites have been found there. If there were archaeological sites there, they certainly would have been found. And there's no need to look for something that isn't there or to wonder where they are when all this evidence is over across the Dead Sea on the eastern shoreline. Located north of the Dead Sea is Tel El Hammam. The excavators of this site claim that it is Sodom.
Now, the site of Tel Hammam, north of the Dead Sea, is in the wrong location.
Which location fits the biblical and extra-biblical sources better? The southern early bronze sites of Baba Dra, Numera, Safi, Haifa, and Kanazir, or the northern site of Tel El Hammam? Again, the southern border of Canaan is established in Genesis 10:19 by turning inland at Gaza and moving in the direction of the cities of the plain. The southern sites fit because this is the known southern border of Canaan. Turning instead towards Tel El Hammam does not fit because this borderline excludes land and many cities that are known to have been in Canaan. Remember that Ezekiel 16:46 says that Sodom is south of Jerusalem, but Tel El Hammam is north of Jerusalem. Deuteronomy 34:3 locates Zoar far to the south of Mount Nebo, but Tel El Hammam is north of Mount Nebo. In Genesis 13, Abraham and Lot separated Bethel. Since Bethel is north of the Dead Sea and the account mentions Sodom, the Tel Hammam excavators use it to support the identification of Tel El Hammam as Sodom. However, what Lot saw from Bethel was the Jordan Valley. He did not see Zoar, but was looking in the direction of Zoar. The mention of Sodom and Gomorrah is not a location, but a time indicator that this event happened before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. But he did not stay in this place east of Bethel, for the text says Lot moved his tent as far as Sodom, thus indicating that Sodom was not close to, but far away from Bethel. In addition to Bethel, we also must consider what happens at Mamre. Mamre is located south of Bethel and Jerusalem. From a lookout near Mamre, Genesis 19 says that Abraham looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. Therefore, the southern location of Mamre fits well with the southern location for the cities of the plain. Also, in Genesis 19, Lot, who is in Sodom, and because he is an old man, refers to Zoar as a town near enough to run to. And because it is nearby, he asks, "Let me flee to it." Tel Hammam is way too far away from Zoar to be near enough for Lot to run to. And keep in mind that it is at Safi that Zoar is preserved on the Madaba map. So when we're reading the Bible, which we absolutely need in order to be accurate, the meaning of these passages is plain. What happens is somebody with an agenda comes and then offers another translation to change the meaning in order to make something that doesn't fit seemingly fit. And so that doesn't really mean that. That really actually means this other thing. We should be very wary of anyone who does this, including archaeologists. Now, not only is the location of Tel El Hammam wrong, but the archaeology is wrong as well. This tel here represents Tel El Hammam because after the time period of Abraham and Lot, whenever it was abandoned, whenever it was destroyed, other cities were rebuilt on the site, and this happened over and over again. In contrast to that, we have Babadra and Numera as a good example of what we can think of as a tell that has had its growth stunted. Why? Because it was famously burned by this sulfur, and then no city was ever built on top of it. It's one of the reasons that it took so long to discover these sites. They didn't look like a magnificent tell.
This is Tel al-Hammam behind me. This is considered one of, if not the biggest tell in all of Jordan. What caused it to rise to such heights? Well, it means that it had a very long occupation history. Many cities were built one on top of another over a very long time, causing this mound to rise and become the magnificent tell that it is. So behind me is the ancient mound of Babadra, and notice that it's not very high. What does this mean? It means that it didn't have a long occupation history, that there weren't several cities built one on top of another over a long period of time.
So as we go through what the prophets and apostles say about the cities of the plain, we see that this is the archaeology that would match that and not the archaeology of Tel al-Hammam. So just for a few examples, in Isaiah 13, Isaiah says of Babylon that it would be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. She will never be inhabited or lived in through all generations. Which one of these would match that description? Obviously, the one that was destroyed, famously by the burning sulfur, and then never inhabited or lived in again through all generations. This wouldn't make any sense because the occupation of this city at whatever times that happened continues in history. Also, Tel al-Hammam was a very large city in the early Roman period, and this is the time of Jesus. And Jesus said of the village of Capernaum that if the miracles that had taken place in Capernaum had taken place in Sodom, it would remain to this day. Which one of these two, again, makes sense archaeologically to match that? It would be the one that has not remained until the time of Jesus, not the one that is an inhabited city in his day. And so the sites of Babadra, Numera, Phypha, and Kanazir fit this description perfectly, whereas Tel al-Hammam, the archaeology is wrong. Now, the excavators of Tel al-Hammam claim that a meteor struck this area and destroyed the cities up there. We have experts that study that very thing, what remains after a meteor strikes the earth. They wrote an article rebutting that claim, saying there is none of the evidence for this up in the north. In contrast to that, everybody agrees that in the southern area of the Dead Sea that there's these huge deposits of sulfur, and there's these sulfur balls. In fact, the sulfur balls are on display in the Archaeology Museum down there as the culprit for the destruction of the cities that are in that area. There is an obvious and clear match between what the Bible says about the cities of the plain and the archaeological evidence. In the Bible, there are 5 cities of the plain, and since 1924, 5 early bronze sites have been found southeast and south of the Dead Sea. Babadra identified as Sodom, Numera as Gomorrah, Safi as Zoar, Phypha as Admah, and Kanazir as Zeboim. The Bible and the archaeology agree. Only the city of Zoar survived. All the others were burned and abandoned. When I was reading in the Bible about the cities of the plain, I always imagined the city of Zoar being on the outskirts of this plain. I saw this huge destruction of this plain, and the city of Zoar must have been just right outside of that, right on the outskirts, right on the edge outside of that destruction. So I was amazed, and I'm still amazed to realize now that that's not the case at all, that actually the city of Zoar is smack dab in the middle of this plain with 2 burned cities on either side. And so this event of the cities of the plain isn't just about burning and destruction and judgment. It's also about salvation. How were the people in Zoar saved? They certainly weren't saved by their own righteousness. They deserved the same judgment as the other cities received. They were saved because Lot had come into their midst. They were saved because of the righteousness of one man. And that's how we also are saved. We're saved by the righteousness of the one man, Jesus Christ, who came into the world in order to save us.
Oh my gosh, Zoar is going up in flames. Arno.
Watch your eyes. All right, I know we're right at time, but any other comments or thoughts before we break? I've enjoyed this series. I've always enjoyed the history with relating back to the Bible. So, Michael will be back next week.
Evidently, you can get those silver bowls online. If you want some silver bowls, transporting rules, make sure you're not supposed to. Just look it up and get it.
Yeah.